Hopefully my introduction is correct. I know her since a long time. She is one of the finest products of Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, where she got her Sandra degree, and then she went to Northwestern University to get her Master in Economics, and after that joining the PhD program in University of Washington, Seattle. When she got back to Indonesia, she worked for Faculty of Economics at Jayant University. Since 2000, I know her. We worked together in several projects, including economic development in Indonesia. And so she became president of Indonesia Regional Science, which is an association that concerns about regional development in Indonesia. And right now, you all know that she's our planning minister. Without further ado, I would like to invite Arndt to give a talk about the book and launch the book. The floor is yours.
Mas Budy. I'm not sure whether I have to talk in bahasa Indonesia or English ya, because campur-campur ya. Ada yang bukan orang Indonesia, maybe not the majority, tapi sebagian besar kan rekan-rekannya dari Indonesia. So maybe what I'm going to do is also I'm going to speak maybe both gaya gado-gado, sometimes in bahasa Indonesia, sometimes in English. Sekali lagi, Mas Budy, Mas Rizal, Sukma, and then colleagues ya, Ibu Menon, Pak T, Pak Wir, and friends, yeah, especially from CSIS. I'm indeed honored to be able to speak at the launch of the book, which is titled Education and Indonesia. So I congratulate Mas Daniel Suryadharma dan juga Pak Kevin Jones, which is published by the Institute of the Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore in cooperation with the Indonesia Project AMU. Certainly, I wish also to thank Mas Budy here as head of the Indonesia Project, also Mas Rizal Sukma, Executive Director of the CSIS, for hosting this event. Especially, regrettably, I could not attend the morning event, which is the Hadi Soesastro Policy Forum. Bu Yanti was here. So certainly this is very distinguished forum in honor of Pak Hadi, who was also my let's say also my mentor and also my tutor. Pak Hadi was also a friend of myself. I could not think of a better place than this policy forum to launch the book, given the critical role of CSIS as Indonesia's foremost think tank for the government and other stakeholders. So not only for the people like us, the researchers, but I'm sure it will also benefit parliamentarian, political parties, businesses, and NGOs on social, political, and economic issues. And as you are all aware, this book, Education in Indonesia, is based on papers presented at the annual Indonesia Update Conference at the AMU last year, September 2012. So maybe I end the written remarks there because I'm going to say something, maybe one I think is important. As maybe more as a free thinker. The past 3 years, 3.5 years, sometimes it is a luxury for like myself to be a free thinker sometimes. But since this is, I'm sure, a closed forum, a closed forum, I think it's also a good place for me to say something that I thought is important. Let me start by quoting from the book. Ya, ini Mas Daniel yang tulis dan Pak Kevin Jones, chapter 1, just one of the sentences. Let me quote this. If well-informed persons anywhere in the world were asked about what they knew about education in various countries, they would be likely to have something to say about countries, for example, India or South Korea. The same informed persons would be unlikely to have ready answers if asked about education in Indonesia, however. Yeah? There appear to be few distinctive images of Indonesian education that are widely known internationally. Yet, in Indonesia, as elsewhere in Asia, education will inevitably play a key role in the trajectory of national development as the 21st century unfolds. Indonesian education may lack a clear image, benign or otherwise, in the international community, but that is not because nothing is happening. I think this is so true, yeah. This is so true, yeah. These few sentences that Mas Daniel and Pak Kevin Jones wrote in chapter 1 of this book. And when I also skip, yeah, I didn't have yet the time to really read the book. I think the content of the book and the contribution, yeah, of the book, yeah, really reflecting the performance and challenges of the education sector in Indonesia until now. Yeah. So it's very true, yeah. The performance and challenges, including from the early. If you look at the education sector, in terms of the stages in the education, including from the PAUD stage, PAUD, and then the basic education comprises of the primary as well as the junior secondary, and then the senior secondary, tertiary, as well as the madrasah schooling system or the Islamic education system. So I think the book really captures all, I think almost all the aspects, the issues, and as well as the challenges. So what I'm trying to do now, I think if you want to refer to all those issues, I think this book already covers in details and very richly. So what I'm going to do now is highlight on the issue of achievement, progress, and also relate that to the way forward. The way blueprint, the way forward, as well as relate that to the where we are going to go in terms of our national development, especially beyond now, because we are moving towards the third national medium-term development plan of 2015-2019. So let me begin with the first issue that I would like to also give my comment. So about the achievement progress, of course this book have written a lot about that. What I'm going to add is about this. Sometimes it's very difficult for people to capture immediately what has the education sector of Indonesia achieved with all this budget at 20% of the budget. Maybe the easiest, maybe one indicator that says a lot about this is I'm going to use the expected years of schooling. I don't know if many of you have been following this or not. In terms of expected years of schooling, the latest data says that expected years of schooling of children entering schooling years, meaning children of 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, is 12.7 years. So 12.7 years, what does it mean? 12.7 years, meaning that child will graduate, certainly primary school, will graduate junior secondary school, will certainly graduate senior secondary school, and maybe he or she will also have opportunity to enter tertiary education. So this is actually the achievement of what we've been doing, government have been doing, all of us, including supported by the 20%. And this is on par, or at par, with, you can check it, at par with countries such as Malaysia, with many other countries. And we are ahead compared to several other countries within ASEAN, or even Asia Pacific. So this is a lot, 12.7 years of expected years of schooling of a child who is entering this school age. And then contrast this now with the current indicators of, for example, average years of schooling. What is the average age of schooling of the Indonesian population now? Is around 8 something, but Mas Daniel, 8 years something. Meaning that not yet quite finished junior secondary school. And then the average years of schooling of the workforce now, maybe still around half. Half of our workforce just completed primary or even less. Yeah. So meaning what? Meaning that I think the benefit, of what we are doing, supported by this 20%, we are going to start to reach, or to merasakan benefit itu maybe in 10 years from now, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And this is certainly with note that funding is not an issue yet. What I mean is availability of financial resources is not the primary issue. Although we have to be very careful on fiscal sustainability issue, once a certain program, become permanent. Let me give you an example. For example, a teacher remunerasi. Kan itu once it become a permanent program, then we have to really carefully calculate the impact, the implication on the fiscal side. So the fiscal sustainability issue. Another example is, for example, PMU, Pendidikan Menengah Universal. Jadi leading towards 12 years, compulsory education. Once it's become permanent program, mandatory, we have to calculate the fiscal sustainability issues 3, 4, 5 years forward. And then, so what I would like also to raise is on, certainly what we've seen so far is the policies, programs, activities in the education sector, more or less, is addressing the challenges of accessibility, accessibility, the distribution and so on, accessibility of the student pupils, but not so much about the inequality in the distribution, not so much yet on the teachers' quality and performance, and also how to link that is better pay of teacher with better performance of the teacher. Not yet systematically that issue has been addressed. And also, we are trying now to address this quality with another dimension, the introduction of the curriculum 2013. This is also a big job, And on the early childhood education, I would like also to mention that actually what is being developed is not only the early childhood education, pendidikan anak usia dini, but more broadly, perkembangan anak usia dini. So on the development, so including the health, nutrition, and so on. So actually, if you want to capture the whole dimension of this early childhood development, is actually not only education. And then I would like now to move on to the blueprint and way forward, how to relate this with where we are going to do in terms of national development, the direction of our development. As I mentioned earlier, that we are now preparing towards the next FPJMN, the the third National Medium Development Plan 2015-2019, especially as in Bappenas. Bappenas' way of work is actually we have to be, I always say to my colleagues here in Bappenas, we have to be always 1 or 2 steps ahead. We cannot plan something as a residual, right? We have to be 1 or 2 steps ahead, including this FPJM, the next one, 2015-2019. That's why this year and certainly next year, we are in Bappenas very busy now doing background studies, gathering information, data, and so on to prepare for this FPJM. Now, for the next FPJM, the emphasis, because it's already in this long-term development framework, it's already there, the direction. The next FPJM will focus on how to build or to enhance the capacity of our human resources, including our human resources development, especially how to be more at the competitive advantage side. Also to support the innovation and things like that. That's why what we see, the challenges in the education sector development is how also to prepare our human resources, leading towards that focus. And also in the next 15, 20 or maybe maximum 25 years, this demographic dividend. That's why all this priority direction, including activities of the education sector is very important. What we are doing now is still, this accessibility and so on, quality and distribution, but not so much starting to pay attention on the quality and so on, but not yet, I think not yet, systematically try to move, the human resources development to support this. Whereas in the national development, the vision is clear, but not yet. I think the education sector is geared towards that. But in closing, I just want to relate this with another plan that we are now implementing, which actually trying to move into that direction, including the human resource development, which is the master plan, the MP3I. The MP3I, if you've been following this, the third component is on the innovation, the human resource development to support the innovation later on in later stages. So this is very important. And to be honest, the education sector not yet paid a systematic attention or what planning and so on that direction. So with that, I would like to close my remarks, and again, congratulations to Mas Daniel, Suryadharma, and Pak David Jones for the excellent book on the education in Indonesia. And with that, so I have to say something, and then I officially launch the book on the education in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
To formally symbolize this book launch, I would like to invite Daniel and Kevin to come in front and together give the book to Ibu Luarbida. Just give one of the books. Second person I would like to invite is Ibu Yanti, Hadi Soesastro. Is it Yanti over here? Yes. We would like to give the book also to Yanti as our respected Hadi for this event. Thank you very much. Let us move to the next session, which is about the presentation of the book chapter. I would like to invite Daniel, so here, Samir and Pak Ikyanwi to go in front, and we will start the next session off.
Oh ya, nanti aja kan.
Let us go to the next session. The format is as follows. I will allow these gentlemen to speak for about, each of them for about 15 minutes, and then we will have a question and answer. The first person that we're going to present is Hadi Soesastro, who will talk about the broad content of the book.
Thank you, Budy, and also thank you, Ibu Armida, for launching the book. And thank you all for staying after lunch. I know it's hard to stay after lunch, but I guess in such a beautiful building, you can stay for a few more hours. Today I'm just going to try to set the scene on education in Indonesia, and then I'm going to hand over to the real experts, Samir and Ikyanwi, so they can talk about the more nitty-gritty stuff. So I first want to tell you the motivation for writing the book. The first one is this two-way relationship between education and economic growth that most of us know about. So education has a positive relationship with economic outcomes. Studies have found more educated countries grow faster, and also more educated countries have better social outcomes, like the people are healthier, they have better support for democracy, and all those things. So for a poor country coming out with a low human resource base, it's one of the best ways to start growth is by investing in primary education. But then as an economy grows, the employment structure also changes. So before, when agriculture is the most dominant sector, you don't really need bankers or people with skills to operate machines. But as manufacturing grows, services sector grows, then we need people with these mid-level skills that are just not produced by primary basic education. And also, as an economy grows, as people get richer, they demand more education. So there's this two-way relationship between education and economic growth. So the upshot of all of this is further investment in education is actually, investment in secondary or tertiary education is necessary if you want to sustain economic growth. Now, the second motivation for the book is that the quality of education is crucial. All the things I mentioned before about education increasing economic growth and all the social outcomes actually talk about the quality of education rather than just attainment in terms of completed years of schooling. It's very easy or straightforward to increase education participation. You just build schools and put kids there. But increasing quality is much harder. It's you can always put kids through school, but having them learn something in school is much harder. So there is actually little point in offering compulsory low quality education. If you make people stay in school for 9 or 12 years, but actually don't teach them anything, then you're actually wasting people's time. So on that note, I will talk about just two things. One is just several indicators of attainment, and then I'll talk about some snippets from the book that are not covered by Samir or Ikyanwi. So let's talk about of indicators of attainment. So I hope everyone can see this triangle here. So this triangle, if you just look on the right screen, on the left is proportion of Indonesians who have no schooling, so it goes from 0 to 100. On the right is the proportion of Indonesians with primary and lower secondary education, so 1 to 9 years, from 0 to 100 here. And then in the bottom, upper secondary and tertiary. also from 0 to 100. So if you look at Indonesia in 1971, up there, you can see that about 55 or 58% of Indonesians have primary or secondary. And then if you pull the line to the left, about 42% have no schooling. And if you pull it to the right lower side, you see almost nobody has upper secondary or tertiary education. That's in 1971. And then the graph moves downward the next decades up to 2000, and then the latest data that we have is in 2009. And in 2009, if we pull it right there, about 70% of Indonesians have primary and lower secondary education. 10% have no schooling, and about 30% have upper secondary or tertiary education. So that's the latest status on education attainment measured through years of schooling in Indonesia. This is the mix, if you will, of education attainment. Now let's talk about, that was the average. Now let's talk about inequality in access to education. So this graph on the left here is from 1993. So what we did here is we take every household with 16 to 18-year-olds living in them, and then we divide them into 5 groups according to their socioeconomic status. So quintile 1 is the 20% poorest households. Quintile 5 is the top 20% of households. If you just focus on the quintile 5, which is there, quintile 1, which is there, you see that for a 16 to 18-year-old in quintile 1, the poorest households, less than 20% of them can survive up to year 12. Look at the rich there. If you look at those living in rich households, about 70% survive up to 12 years of education. So the distance between this triangle and this diamond here is the inequality in access to education by socioeconomic status. That was in 1993. And then we move forward to 2009, and the distance has actually narrowed. So inequality in access to education have decreased. Now, children from poor households, 30% of them survive up to 12 years of education. But children from rich households, almost 80% can get to 12 years of education. So those are the 2 slides I want to talk about education attainment. First, the average, and then second, the inequality. Now, I want to talk about skills, because we're interested in skills now. I'm going to give you some tests and see if you can answer them correctly. Right, so this is the first question. What's 56 over 84? You have 4 options. I'll give you a minute. No? Give you 10 seconds to think about it. What's the correct answer for that? The correct one is B. It's 2 over 3. Everybody got that? That's good. Right, so I'll give you a second question. This is harder or easier, up to you. So that, and what's the answer? Easy, just look at the last number. It's 0.13. So I don't know if you got it right or not, but don't tell me. So what we did now is there was a survey that gives these questions to 15 to 24-year-olds in Indonesia. It was about 3,000 individuals done in 2000, and on average they had 2 minutes to answer each question. I gave you 5 seconds to answer each question. They have 2 minutes. What do you think they performed? So about a third can answer question 1 correctly, and about 44% answered question 2 correctly. So that was in 2000. The survey came back in 2007, asked the same question. So different cohorts, 7 years apart. So question 1 is now 38%. So there's not much difference between 36 and 38. And then 44 up to 53. So this means that there's very small improvement between different cohorts 7 years apart if you ask them the same questions. These are the same age group. So that was the skills of the working age population in Indonesia. Just an illustration. So what about 8th graders? So these are people who have been in school for 8 years. And there's this question. Think of a fraction that's more than 4 over 9. So what's the right answer? So 3 over 9 is the right answer. and 4/10 is the correct answer. So what they did is, if these children answer 3/8, then they would be correct. Now, how many of them answered correctly this question? So this is an international test done in 2007. So in Singapore, 84% of the kids answered correctly. Korea and Japan, 81%. Australia, 71%. And now we're going down. US, Malaysia, and then where's Indonesia? South Africa, 30%. Then Indonesia is here, 26%. So about a quarter of children who have been in school for 8 years can answer that question correctly. And Indonesia is not far off the bottom, which is Ghana at 21%. So these are just some indicators of skills in Indonesia. And like I said, if you look at the attainment, average attainment, then it looks like an okay picture. But if you look at quality, then it's a bit worrying. And then that was the average. Now let's look at inequality in skills again. So this is the PISA international test. If we look at this 2009, the two right-hand bars, this is the score of children coming from the 10% poorest household, 380 their score. And then children coming from the top 10%, 442. So there's a significant differences in skills, math skills between children from poor and rich households. If you go back from 2003, 2009, there isn't much change in inequality itself. So takeaway points from me: school completion is increasing in Indonesia, inequality and access to schooling is decreasing, but school quality is low and stagnant, and children from poor households have lower skills. Just the last two slides before I go and hand over to the real experts. Here are some snippets from the book. There is one chapter written by Chris York on teacher training, school norms, and teacher effectiveness. So Chris went to a number of junior high schools in East Java, and he just stayed with them for a few months. And this is what he observed. Teachers didn't show up for about approximately 30% of classes they were sent to teach, and they were not penalized for their absence. So if you go to 100 classrooms at random, then 30 of them won't have any teachers. But this is just in a small sample of schools, so it's not nationally representative. But interestingly, this is what Chris observed. The same individuals almost always appeared on time for the Monday flag ceremony. So this is the facts in Indonesia. So if you're a teacher and you're asked to teach, then you don't come. If you're a teacher, you're asked to go to the flag ceremony, then you come. And he said decades of stress on obedience and loyalty have left individuals unprepared, individuals meaning teachers, unprepared to act as leaders. And when reform initiatives challenge them or give them additional burden, the teachers respond in the safest and least risky way, which is by ignoring the pressure to change. And this is a chapter from people who are here, I think Diaz and Rifan. Yes, they're here. Just two quotes on the need of locally relevant universities. They said that although Indonesia needs world-class research universities, of course every country needs 1 or 2 or 10. That aspiration is not realistic for many of its tertiary education institutions. So what they mean is that Indonesia requires a different breed of institutions, one that supplies skills to local economy, induce social transformation, influence local policy, and provide relevant innovations. Yes, so that's all I have. Now I'm going to hand over to Sandra and then thanks very much for your attention.
I would like to invite Hamid from the World Bank to talk a little bit about his chapter in his book.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'd just like to thank at the outset CSIS and ANU for inviting us here today. And I'd also like to thank Daniel in particular for his patience with his authors in the book and giving us a bit of time. I'm going to talk very briefly about some issues around the financing of education. I can't promise to be as snappy as Daniel, but I can promise you that there's no tests in my presentation. So I think Implementary and Daniel both talked a lot about the outcomes in the education system. And and I really wanted to maybe take one step back from that and look at what Indonesia's been doing in education over the last decade. What are the reforms that it's put in to the education system? And then I'm not going to really touch very much on the results because I think both Daniel and the Minister provided a very good snapshot, but I thought I would just summarise what they've said. And then I wanted to focus on just two key challenges that I think the research that we've done, the analysis that we've done in the bank really are thrown out as being big challenges for the education sector going forward. There are other challenges that I think are also important, but I think these are two key challenges. So what's really shocked me about Indonesia, which often doesn't come across, particularly if you are someone in another country, is the significant amount of reform that has been going on over the last decade. The decentralization reforms shifted responsibility for education to local governments, particularly for basic education. The teacher law in 2005 introduced a substantial set of reforms and laws. I think there's 20 or so decrees that were or have currently been published from the law, which really set out to improve the quality of teachers and to raise teacher accountability. There's been free basic education policies, there's been school-based management policies, we've had a big expansion in ECD, and then last year we had a new higher education law. And behind all of this has also been a very large commitment on the part of the government to devote significantly more resources to education. And I think this just shows, in summary, what's been happening to education spending, or government education spending in the last decade. And you can see with the 20% rule, where in, I think, 2002, there was a constitutional amendment that committed the government to devoting at least 20% of the budget to education. It took a while to come through the budget, but in 2009, the government started spending 20% on education. And over the decade, Indonesia has trebled its spending on education. And just to give you an idea, there's only 2 other countries that have ever or have done that in recent times. I mean, trebled their education spending over such a short period of time. So some impressive improvements in investments in education. And I don't want to repeat what Daniel has said already, but I guess that we've seen some very large improvements in access to education. We've seen some impressive improvements in equity. There's many more poor children are going to school, staying longer in school. Gender equity has improved. A generation ago, I think men were 50% more likely to finish senior secondary education. Now, actually, men and women are equally likely to finish senior secondary. There's still some challenges in terms of post-age 15, in terms of equity. We see lots of poor children discontinuing their education, and you see gaps between the poor and the wealthiest groups in Indonesia growing as you move up, and when you get to tertiary, they're very large gaps. As Daniel was saying, I guess the thing that when you read the media and when you hear people talk about the education sector in Indonesia, the thing that stands out as being the most worrying aspect is that despite this large increase in the resources that have been spent on education and this very large reform effort, there hasn't been significant improvements in the quality of education. And Daniel's sample of 3,000 kids and answering those questions, I think, is reflected by many other studies, whether it's international assessments as is shown here, or sort of smaller sample-based surveys that we've done here. That we've seen some improvements in the PISA and TIMSS international assessments. We see improvements in reading, but in terms of maths and science, there hasn't really been any major improvements despite this increase. So the chapter in the book sort of looks at, okay, why is it that with this big increase in investment and the reforms that have been going on, why haven't we seen a bigger bang for the money that the government has been putting in? And as I said, I just wanted to focus on two. So one thing that the government has been spending a lot of those increased resources in has been on teachers. And the graph here just looks at the share of the total government budget that goes to education and breaks it down by what it was spent on. So between 2006 2008, this is before we saw this big jump in education investment, about 9% of the total government budget was being spent on teacher salaries, and around 1% was being spent on the large teacher certification program. So in 2009, we saw a big jump, and a much greater proportion of the overall government budget was being spent on teacher salaries, and as more teachers became certified, more resources, more government resources would be integrated to the teacher certification program. So one of the big outcomes of this increased spending has been increased teacher hiring. So if you look across the last 5 or 10 years, the number of teachers in basic education, primary, junior secondary, and even to some extent senior secondary, has it been increasing? And it's been increasing at a much faster rate as the improvements in access. And what that has led to are very substantial declines in student-teacher ratios. So the latest data we have in Indonesia, the primary student-teacher ratio is around 18 students per teacher, and at junior secondary it's lower, around 14 or 15 students per teacher. Now these are really, really low ratios compared to other countries. On this graph it shows Indonesia's student-teacher ratios. These horizontal lines show the averages for lower middle income countries. This is for primary, so the average for other countries at a similar level of economic development to Indonesia is around 26 compared to Indonesia's 17. And at the junior secondary level, for all lower middle income countries it's around 20, and in Indonesia it's much lower. So, student-teacher ratios, low student-teacher ratios can sometimes be good. It generally means that class sizes are small, students get more individualized attention. So we may expect that these declines in student-teacher ratios would have improved the quality of education. Well, we did a survey a couple of years ago to look at the relationship between the student-teacher ratios in schools and learning outcomes. So these are tests of maths and Bahasa Indonesia, and the graphs show this is the test score on the vertical axis and the student-teacher ratio on the horizontal axis. And the blue squares, diamonds, are schools. And you can see that as the student-teacher ratio declines, as it goes from, say, around 30 here to around 10 here, the increase in student learning outcomes is very small, is very, very limited. So these big increases, or sorry, big declines in student-teacher ratios haven't really improved student learning outcomes. And it's partly because the student-teacher ratios are so low. So if you have student-teacher ratios that are very high, when you've got 40 or 50 children in the class, then there's a disadvantage to learning in that classroom. Teachers have to maybe teach in different ways. They can't spend so much time. But once you get to around 20, 25 students, there's a lot of arguments about exactly the level. Those advantages of smaller class sizes start to diminish. And Indonesia, by looking at these graphs, has gone beyond where you see some advantages of small class sizes. So one big part of the spending has gone to increase teachers. Another big aspect of, or a big increase in investment on teachers has been on teacher certification. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the education sector, the government introduced a teacher certification program which gave teachers an allowance that was equivalent to their basic pay if they could demonstrated that they were competent teachers. And initially they did that by demonstrating through a portfolio of their past training and experience that they were competent, and more recently teachers have had to take a test to demonstrate their competency. So the idea behind it was that this would improve the quality of teaching and would improve the quality of learning. We've been undertaking with the Ministry of Education an impact evaluation of the teacher certification program, and whilst it's still sort of relatively early days, there's lots of we would expect there to be effects over the long term by the increase in the pay, attracting better students into teacher training. The short-term effects that we're finding is that the certification program has improved teacher livelihoods. It's increased their salaries. They feel more financially secure. They don't take on so many second jobs. But it hasn't so far translated into any improvement in learning outcomes. And when the Minister was talking about sustainability, I think she mentioned the certification program. Because it's doubling the teacher salary, it's an enormous burden on the education budget. And as more and more teachers become certified, as the government aims to certify all the teachers, it will continue to absorb significant amounts of resources in the system. One other sort of key area, and it's related to decentralization, that I wanted to focus on a little bit about why maybe we're not seeing the impacts on learning outcomes from the reforms and the increase in investment, is around decentralization. So in 2001, with the decentralization reforms, basic education in particular became the responsibility of local governments. And with it came the responsibility essentially to finance basic education. And this graph just shows the shares of spending on education by different levels of education. And I just wanted to focus a little bit on basic education here. So district governments and provincial governments themselves devote around, or provide around 2/3 of the budget or the spending, public spending on basic education. And if you include the BOSS, the school grants programs, which is a central, it's a provincial now program, but it's spent at the school level, around 80% of all of the resources for basic education are at least notionally controlled by schools and local governments. So there's a graph here which hasn't come up, and it's the one that always says that this is a really complicated graph, and I'm always worried about it. So obviously it's helped me out by not actually showing it. But one of the things with in terms of decentralization is that you see an enormous disparities across different districts in terms of education outcomes. So in some parts of Indonesia, you find that learning outcomes, UN scores, enrollment rates are very good, and in some areas they're not so good, and there's a big disparity. There's also enormous differences in the resources that districts devote to education. This was my graph, which showed you this big dispersal of spending. But really, it's really significant that some districts in Papua are spending over 20 million rupiah per student, compared to some districts, I think in Java, maybe West Java, East Java, that are spending more like 2 million per student. There's big disparities, and there's also big differences in what those resources actually end up. Some districts, they don't spend very much, but they seem to have very good outcomes. Some districts spend a lot and don't have very good outcomes. And some of that is to do with other characteristics, poverty, different difficulties in terms of remoteness of the district. But also a key part is the quality of local governance. And a large part, or a significant part of the disparities that we see is the ability of districts themselves, the capacity of districts, their management capacity to run a good quality basic education service. And this shows just very quickly, gives some information about the quality of local governance. We did a survey in 50 districts in Indonesia to look at how districts manage their education systems and how it differs. And as a very quick summary, there's significant weaknesses that we see in the survey for the districts themselves, in monitoring and evaluation, in management control systems. There's lack of incentives, very limited community participation in planning and budgeting decisions at the local level. And we find that there's relatively low levels of transparency and accountability in districts, in terms of education, in terms of education planning processes. But we also find that where there are strong, or where there's lots of transparency and accountability in those processes, education outcomes tend to be a lot stronger. So to sum up very quickly, we tried in the book to sort of try and highlight some of the implications for policy. In terms of teacher management, because the certification system is a very large pillar of reforms that are currently ongoing around teachers, there's a need for the strengthening of the system, trying to link more closely the competency of teachers with certification, and perhaps also looking at certification not as a one-shot, you become certified, you don't, and that's it, but rather that it's something that over a period of time you would have to be recertified to ensure that you as a teacher are developing professionally and you're still competent to stand in front of the classroom. And there's issues around the inefficiencies in teacher hiring that are driving some of those student-teacher ratios. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but the intergovernmental transfer systems, the way that resources come from the centre to the district, are also partly resulting in some of these limited outcomes that we're seeing from the spending. And then, as I was just talking in the last slide, there's a real need to strengthen local government capacity, and particularly in terms of strengthening planning and budgeting, and improving school-based management. Thank you.
I would like to invite Yose to talk a little bit about the chapter there.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about our chapter in the Daniels and Gavin's book. My presentation will be just a short, will be just appetizer. For the main course served by my mentor, Yang Di Pertuan Agung Professor Hell Hill. I'll Hell Hill. So this is just a summary of the main points in our chapter, and First, introduction. Indonesia has one of the largest and fastest growing tertiary education systems in the world. In 2010, about 5.2 million. Now it's, of course, 3 years later, there are more students. University students were enrolled in higher education institutes, including universities, academies, akademi, dinas luar negeri dan sebagainya, polytechnics and advanced school, sekolah tinggi, with almost 3 times as many enrolled in private as in public institutions, which is not surprising, of course, because the private sector has more financial resources. These students were enrolled in about 3,600 higher education institutes, mainly by the Ministry of Education and Culture, and also by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, Kementerian Agama. The focus in our chapter on Indonesia is approximately 550 universities which receive public funding and are seen as a major vehicle for raising the standards of know-how and intellectual discourse and providing high-level policy advice to the government if needed. In our chapter, we make 5 broad generations about Indonesia's higher education institutes. First, the Indonesian universities essentially are the creation of the second half of the 20th century, which grows largely in the fourth quarter of the 20th century, so it is from 75 to 2000. During the Dutch colonial era, the tertiary was quite small. During the first 2 decades of independence, 45-65, growth of the higher institutes were constrained by other nation-building priorities, including the necessity to expand primary and secondary education. Consequently, Indonesia is an education laggard, as already pointed out in the previous speaker, ranking behind China, India, and middle-income Asian neighbors, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. The third point is higher education sector grew very rapidly since the 1980s, driven by more graduates from the secondary schools. As Indonesia graduated into the lower middle-income group of countries, demand for higher education became highly income elastic as labor market demanded more skilled learners. The fourth generation is there's a large variation in good quality of the higher education institutes, with only a few elite, mostly state universities, such as UI, University of Indonesia, University Gajah Mada, Institut Pertanian Bogor, and Institut Teknologi Bandung. The fifth generation is much of the philosophical domain governing higher education remains a matter of convention. Government policy is dominated by strongly interventionist approach, as in other fields as well. The initial cautious test toward a less centralized regime was strongly resisted in some quarters. The Asian universities and overview. Indonesia's status as an educated government is revealed in the Baroli schooling attainment data. In 1960, 68% of the population aged 15 years and over had no or incomplete primary education. While average year for schooling for the section of population was only 1.6. The comparative figures for Indonesian ASEAN members were Malaysia 2.0 years, Philippines 4.2 years, and Thailand 4.3 years. So we were really at Indonesia laggard. The low figures for Indonesia were due to colonial neglect. For instance, in 1939, only 1,380 Indonesian students graduated from elite Dutch secondary schools, like the ABS and the IFS, or Menon Middle School. Compared with 1,261 European, almost exclusively Dutch, of course, students, and 570 other Asians, mostly ethnic Chinese students, and some Arabs and some Indians. Indonesian university. Since 1970, the tertiary enrollments have risen very rapidly. In 1975, about 260,000 students were enrolled in tertiary institutions, a little over half of them in public universities. Since then, more than 1 million students have been added every decade. The numbers rising to 1.52 million in 1985, 2.68 million in 1995, and 3.87 million in 2005, with more than 1.3 million added over the period 2005-2010, to over 5 million in 2010. Maybe it's now 6 million. Hence, the gross enrollment rate, the GER, that is the number of students enrolled as a percentage of the group, aged 19 to 23 years, has also risen quickly from 18.3% in 2005 to 24.7% in 2010, and now slightly over 25% in 2013. This table 1 below, that will follow later, classifies tertiary enrollments by type of institution. In order of size, private institutions are by far the largest, with over half of the total enrollments. Public institutions, the rapidly growing open university, Universitas Terbuka, religious-based institutions administered by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and a small group of special institutions, mainly represented by government ministries and agencies, for instance, the Department Luar and the Department Luar Negeri. Indonesia's tertiary gross enrollment ratio is comparable to that of China, but well below that of its higher income ASEAN neighbors, Malaysia and Thailand, only about 1/3 the OECD average, which is very small. Indonesia also lags behind its higher income neighbors in its public expenditure on higher education. As a percentage of its GDP, it spent only 0.3%, about the same as the Philippines, but only half the figures for South Korea and Taiwan. Most are known for the very large expenditure on private universities. This shows the higher education of Indonesia from 2005 to 2010. Actually, it should be expanded. We have not yet updated our data. So you see that the gross enrollment has steadily risen over the 5 years. It's risen quite rapidly, from 18% to almost 25% in 2010. The enrollment in public universities rose from 805 of almost 806,000 to over 1 million in 2010. Now maybe it's 1.2 million. Private universities, the enrollment rose from 2.2 million to 2.8 million in 2010. Special institutes rose from 49 to 93%. It's quite fast. The religious-based institutions, the enrollment rose from 508,000 to 571,000. The Open University achieved the most rapid development from 262 to 645 something. There are 4 things to be considered to be best practice in managing universities. Leading universities are internationally connected institutions, with many aiming for international population of at least 30% for the faculty and 20% for students, which would require high levels of cross-country mobility with minimal regulatory barriers. These universities need to be well-resourced. For instance, the United States spends about 3.3% of its gross domestic product on higher educations, including both public and private universities. It's the European Union 1.3%. The third key feature is high-quality university governance involving autonomy. It's very important from the government. Freedom from political pressure, incentives for good performance, and collegial and competitive spirit. Competition sometimes overrules collegial. Yes, sometimes rather nasty competitions, isn't it, Professor? The importance of constant independent review processes for all aspects of university operations, including appointments, promotions, academic output, and general resource allocation. The current situation now, that is in 2010. In 2009, 5.2 million students were enrolled in about 3,600 national institutions. There are 3 tiers of universities in the public sector. The elite public universities, numbering 5 to 7, depending on your criteria. Depend on other 47 to 49 public universities of mixed but generally low quality, and some other institutions also of very good quality, administered by the Ministry of Religious Affairs and other ministries, for instance, the Foreign Affairs and Finance. In practice, the system is dominated by the private sector, as almost 75% of all students are enrolled in private universities, which is understandable, which also accounts for most of the recent growth. The state universities are also increasingly privatized in terms of their funding, because the government doesn't have enough funding to provide adequate funding. Indonesia has about 410 private universities. I think this is maybe an underestimate. And about 2,900 private polytechnics, academies, and scholar tinggi. The quality of this institution is more valuable in the public sector, which is, of course, understandable. You have very good universities, private universities, like Universitas Katolik Parahyangan, Universitas Ampajaya, Trisakti University, and Tarumana University. But close to my house, you have also Universitas Empu Tatula, and you have Universitas Borobudur. I don't think you want to send your children there. The 5.2 million students in Malaysian education are enrolled in more than 3,600 institutions. The next slide I will provide the table. There are 3 tiers of universities in the public sector. The elite public universities, as I mentioned, UI, IPB, Venepada, maybe University of Ponegoro, and Universitas Erlangga, all in Java, mind you. 47 to 45 universities of mixed but yet low quality, and some other institutions also of very low quality. So, the higher education system is dominated by the private sector, since almost 75% of all students are enrolled in private institutions, and this institution accounts for most of the recent growth. The state universities are de facto increasingly private in terms of their funding. I feel that this is the repetition. How come? Maybe I was sleepy when I prepared this Maybe I was looking at the blue movie. Table 2, mid-education. You see that there are 48 public universities, and under the Ministry of Religious Affairs there are 6. The institutes, there are 6, IPB, and 14. Well, I don't. You can read it. None of you, I'm sure, is illiterate or innumerate, so you can just have a look. Performing it. There are very large differences in textual groups across regions and social groups. According to the 2011 National Social Survey, I almost finished. 55%. Well, I think you can read it. I don't have to read it, because you can read. I'm sure none of you is illiterate. Sorry. Okay. Well, you have finished. You are all competent in speed reading, aren't you? Okay. Use the governance and interest is, I think it's the latest. I prepared it 2 weeks ago. And I sent it to to Professor Hill, to ask for comments, but he didn't reply. He was too busy writing papers and books. Professor Hill, he's an extraordinary professor. Ordinary person like me, we perspire sweat. Professor Hill, he perspires books. They can be self-structured signals, generally complex, obscure and poorly geared for incentive. Actual incomes often bear literally same of the salaries, since most academics earn a significant portion of their income off campus, which is one reason why the education quality is not so good. They are all moonlighting. Economies is such based on the seniority and is governed by a complex mechanical coup system. There's very little institutional economic mobility due to regulatory structure somewhat by kind of, okay, you can read it. Accreditation, maybe global okay, you can read it. I don't have to read it. Just equity, of course, mostly come from higher income people like Professor Myling Garner. She's very rich, It's a beautiful fact that children can be high quality. There is, of course, bilik misi mission. Biasa pendidik untuk maksud miskin, which provide eligible students with allows 600,000. Actually, this is not a very good, because you have to take account of regional variations. In Jakarta, 600,000 is not enough. When you are in Kupa, 600,000 may be enough. Private, there is some private philanthropy, like the Sampurna Foundation. Autonomy, you can read it. It was it will, and then well, anyway, autonomy is absolutely important, But I wrote an article in Compass pleading for universal autonomy, referring to Singapore. Singapore is a very autonomous state, but
some people will upset with you.
oh really? But but I have not received threats on my life. Well, anyway, despite my appeal to the members of parliament not to approve, maybe most of them do not read books, they just read comics. So that's why this bill was accepted, but because of the many protests, the Minister of Education, Professor Nook, said, well, anyway, all these criticisms completed in various regulations. That's why we have so many regulations. Yeah, conclusion, you can read this. Okay, terima kasih. Oh, doa arigatou gozaimasu.
We will have another session for discussing this book, but I would like to allow 10 minutes for you to ask a question. Okay, one Bu Meling, Bapak, and is there any others? Please, Bu Meling first.
Oh, thank you. Ladies first, huh? I would like to ask a question to you. You didn't mention your name, so I'm sorry, I can't say my name.
It's on the slide.
What's his name? Hamid. You're Mr. Hamid. Okay. You spoke about basic education, right? Yet, what we are talking about today is about final exams, which how does it fit into the financing as well as into the quality? And the same is the minister's hobby horse of changing the curriculum. Every minister has to change the curriculum. The current one is supposed to cost $2.5 trillion for, what is it? For now, about 200,000 schools. And now it's 6,000 schools for 846 billion. It's about a third. How does that lead in or not? Is it any relation at all? Or is that you didn't deal with it because there isn't? Thank you.
Thank you. Second the gentleman over there, please.
Good afternoon, my name is Lee Lontok. I have actually an opinion, and I hope that I can bounce this to all these honorable speakers. So, speaking about education in Indonesia, I have experienced this like big change in Indonesian education system, especially when Indonesia changed the education system in 1998 and 1999. So I can help myself that I should rest my analysis on what happened in 1999.
This one only quick question.
So
later on we will have a bigger session.
So sorry, this is not a question, but please be patient about this one. I think that it cannot be separated that we have like some twofold reactions here. First, at the international level, that there is a robust international education industry and also a saturated education service market in the developed countries. And at the same time, like you have shown here, there is a large, huge growing demand in Indonesia. And I can help myself that I have to analyze the education system in Indonesia is run within this context, within the development of Indonesian education services market or industry in Indonesia. And there is a problem here, which is we saw right now in Indonesian media that there is some sort of hiccup from Indonesia to adapt this new system, and especially because, in my opinion, there is a difficulty in Indonesian teachers to adapt the new system due to there is changing in curriculum and education management. So the problem is like that, and it resulted in the difficulties that Indonesia have right now, like the failures in national examinations or the low quality of Indonesian. And because this hasn't been addressed properly by the government, the race of education services in Indonesia is the race to who has better facilities and not the better qualities. I think I have to limit my opinion like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any one more question? If not, I just give the floor to the speaker. No? Let me give Zamir or Daniel to
Thanks. So only the easy questions this time. Maybe you want to leave those questions to the next session, but I'll try and answer. I mean, maybe to start with the curriculum. I mean, I think just generally, often improving the curriculum or reforming the curriculum is a key part of improving the quality of education and looking at curriculums that have many different subjects and have a lot of demands on students. There's potentially a need to change them and adjust them. But having said that, if you look at other countries, changing the curriculum, reforming the curriculum takes years, right? Many years of piloting and checking that things will work. And so these are reforms that shouldn't be taken too quickly and too lightly. And I think key to that as well is that you have to rely on a very good teaching force and a very good set of teachers to be able to implement new curriculum. And particularly, I think, in the curriculum that is being suggested here, which is extremely challenging. It's a new way of teaching and is particularly challenging. So, the support to teachers in terms of implementing new curriculum will be crucial. Otherwise, it won't work. Then on the national exams, I mean, I think to some extent it's part of I mean, we didn't look at the national exams in particular. It's partly an issue of management of the education system, where I think our analysis shows that there's major weaknesses. But I think there's a bigger issue here, and that's one of accountability. And I think when we talked a little bit about the 20% and the government committing 20% of the budget to education, I mean, that's a very good thing. Very few countries devote that amount, and very few countries commit constitutionally to do it. But there's a flip side to that, which means that the Ministry of Education knows every year that it receives 20% of the budget. Whatever it does, it's going to get 20% of the budget. And that really weakens accountability in the ministry. And I think that the pressure that you would normally have in the ministry, because they know that their next year's budget will be partly conditional on how they perform this year, is not there with the Ministry of Education. And I think maybe things like the national exams and things like this are a manifestation of perhaps a weaker accountability system with the Ministry of Education.
We will have another session after the break. Which is we are going to discuss more this issue with different setting of speakers. But for now, before the break, please join me to thank the speaker for their good presentation.
Thank you, Pak Budy. Refreshments are served at the foyer, and we will start the panel discussion promptly after the coffee break at 3:45. Thank you.
Sorry, Pak.